there, welcome to the Netflix. Today we are joined by Jonathan Mesa. Hi Jonathan.
Hi, that's been a
Hi.
long time.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I think it's the first one we're doing with you remote, right?
I think so, yes.
So that's always a little bit different.
Yep.
So you've got this awesome open source project I keep hearing about.
Yes. Yeah, it's called MSBuild Sdk SqlProj. That's a mouthful, actually. But basically, what it boils down to is it allows you to build SQL Server data tier application packages using the new .NET CLI tooling. So like .NET Build and .NET Pack and .NET Publish and that stuff.
And then we're talking about dacpacs, right? That we used to work with in Visual Studio. And then you can work with them. Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
So yeah, let me, for those people that don't know, let me start share my screen and we can dive in what it is.
Cool.
Let me share my screen here. All right. So I think everybody can see Visual Studio right now, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I have just a blank solution here. And for people that are unaware of this, you can actually do new project. And you can say, I want to have a SQL Server database project in here. So I can create that. I'm just going to call it database 1. That's fine. It's creating the project for me now. And then I can do some stuff in here. So I can create things like tables and stored procedures and all that kind of stuff. There we go. So I have this project here, and I can say right-click and say add a table, and let's call it my fancy table or something. And then I get a designer view, and I can add the SQL file itself here as well. So I can say I have a column. I can say it's a string, and it's not null, and all that kind of stuff. Right, so very simple, and I can add other things in here as well. I can add like a store procedure, for example. Let's call it procedure 1. That's fine, and I get a basic template, and then I can edit the store procedure. And then when I'm happy with this, I can right-click and say let's build this, and it's going to do a compilation, and basically what you get is what's called a dacpac. So if I open the folder here and I go to the bin debug folder, you find that dacpac here. And basically the dacpac contains like a definition basically of what your database should look like, right? So it contains the definition of that store procedure and the definition of the table and all that stuff. And then you can take this to production and you can deploy it to either a new database or an existing one. And what it's going to do, it's going to basically create a script for you that transforms the current database into the model that you've defined here. So it's a model-driven approach. So you define what you want your database to look like, and then you just basically say, make it so. And it's going to make all the changes and do all that kind of stuff. And this has actually been around for, I don't know, I think even started with Visual Studio 2010. I think they called it the Data Dude Edition, if I remember correctly. It's a long time ago, but it's still there and it still works and it's fine. But there are a couple of, well, less fine things with it. So let's say that we commit these changes to version control, right? So I'm gonna add this as the initial code. And then I'm gonna get rid of this for a minute and then push it to a GitHub repo. I already created a repo beforehand, before I started this. So it's pushed up to my to a GitHub repo on my GitHub profile. And now let's switch over to Visual Studio Code running on my Mac. I'm actually working on a Mac here. What you just saw was a VM that's up in Azure. And now let's pull those changes. And I get the files here. And now let's open up a terminal. And let's try and do a .NET build here, because we're on Mac, right? So we want to build stuff. And then it's going to go ahead and try to build this. and what we're going to see is that it's failing. Because the funny thing is, these SQL projects, basically, they only actually work in Visual Studio. That's a bummer. They only work in Visual Studio. So that also means that you need to have Visual Studio on your build server, for example. So if you want to build these projects on during a CI pipeline, for example, you need to have Visual Studio installed on your build server. And while that's, well, I guess you could say that's fine, but you need to have a build agent set up and install Visual Studio on it and make sure that the SQL Server data tools, which actually part of Visual Studio, I need to install that additionally as well. And I thought that's not really nice because we have this command line experience right now with .NET Core or .NET 5. And it's nice if we can just do the same thing on Linux and Windows and Mac as well. So I set out to basically solve that problem.
So Jonathan, do you know if other IDEs, such as JetBrains Rider or maybe even Visual Studio for the Mac, if those IDEs support dacpac, or is it just Windows?
I think it's only on Windows at the moment. I don't think Visual Studio for Mac supports it, at least not as far as I know it. And I don't think JetBrains Rider does either. So yeah, it's basically a Windows only technology at the moment.
Okay.
Which is a bit of a bummer. So I set out to try and fix that basically. And that's where my open source project came in. So it's up on GitHub. This is the repo page for the repository up on GitHub. So it's MSBuild Sdk SqlProj. And as you can see here, it has 8.2 thousand downloads currently. So there's actually quite a few people that are using it. We get some pull requests and some issues filed as well. So that's good to see. So there's actually people that are using it, which is not just me. And there's a README page here, which goes into how you can set this up and how you can get started using this. But I'm going to show you much of this anyway, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just go up to github.com/r-wfm/msbuild.sdk.SqlProj. So how we're going to go ahead and use this then. So let me switch back to Visual Studio. So let me go ahead and open this folder here. And let me get rid of this project from the solution for a minute. Let me just remove this. And then let's get rid of the SqlProj file as well. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And then I'm going to open up a terminal here for now. We don't have any templates just now. I'm working on that, but I hope to have that soon. So I'm just going to use the .NET CLI to create a new class library project. So I'm just going to create that. And then because it's a class library project, I also get a class 1.cs in here. Just going to go ahead and delete that because we don't need it. And then I'm going to add the project back to the solution. Like this. And then I can get rid of this file, the dbmdl file as well. I don't need that. And because this is now what's called an SDK style project, because the new project files that were introduced with .NET Core, I can actually edit the file while I'm in Visual Studio. I don't have to unload it and edit it manually. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this, and I'm going to say msbuild.sdk.SqlProj. And then I need to specify a version number that I want to use, and I actually know that 1.3.0 is the latest version that's up on GitHub, or up on NuGet actually. I'm going to save that. And then it's going to, you can see this here, it's going to restore that package to my machine. And it's taking a little time. And now if I'm going to go and do a build again, you're going to see some output here. And if I go into the folder again, you can actually see that if we go to bin debug, there's now this .NET Standard 2.0 folder in here. If we go and look in here, there's this dacpac here as well, right? So the dacpac that we had before, that's still in here as well. Now let me just commit this to version control again. And push that up to GitHub. And then we're going to go ahead and switch over to Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to pull those changes. So now I have the new project file. I'm going to go ahead and say .NET Build here. And it might fail because it doesn't work with .NET 5 just yet. I'm still working on that. It should be fixed soon. So let me create a global.json file here for just a second and say I want to use
That's the price you pay for always being on the latest version, Jonathan.
Yeah, exactly. You shouldn't install preview bits on your machine, right? So this should now work because now it's using .NET 3.1 SDK on my machine. It's terribly slow right now. I apologize for that. I don't know why that is. But as you can see, the project now builds successfully. And I can get the dacpac here as well. So if you go into the bin release debug folder, you can see that dacpac file is here as well. So now I can do a cross-platform build basically of these projects on both Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I can use this during CI pipelines as well. So I can do it without having Visual Studio installed on my machine. So I already thought that was pretty neat, but I figured there could be some more stuff we can add in here. So one thing is that with the old SQL Server projects, you could actually add a reference to another dacpac file that's on your machine somewhere. And then you can include those objects that you define in the other dacpac into your project. So you can reference tables from another dacpac file, for example. Which is nice, but you need to have the dacpac file on your machine, right? You need to have it there. And there's already a mechanism to share those things with the world, which is called NuGet, right? Yeah, it's nice if you can just add a NuGet package to your project and then include objects from that as well, which is not supported with the SQL Server Data Tools package. But it is supported with this package. So let me go back to Visual Studio again. And I can actually say I want to add manage NuGet packages. And I already have a NuGet package that I've created earlier on my machine. Oh, sorry, I didn't actually build the project yet. So let me switch over to that project. This is the project here. This is using the same package. So it's also using that MSBuild Sdk package. And I've created a table here called my table. Now let me do a .NET pack and push it to a local folder on my machine. And it's created a base project 1000.new package. So that's a NuGet package on my machine. And now let me switch back to the other project. So you can find the project here, and I can actually install this into my project. And it's not working. But what I can do is add it manually. So I can say base project version is 1.0. It should be able to compile it. If we look at the output, you can see that it's adding a reference to the dacpac of that package as well, which means that I can now use for example, this procedure here. I can actually say select star from dbo.mytable because that is defined in the other project file, right? So the other project file is a table defined. If I build it again, it shouldn't fail because it's actually able to find that table. Now there's no IntelliSense here, unfortunately, because that would require us actually having access to a real database, but at least it works, right? So you can actually reference those objects and do that kind of stuff. And that's not supported with the SQL Server Data Tools project, right? So you can't install NuGet packages at all into those projects. And another reason why this is nice is because you now can also extend the MSBuild pipeline with your own stuff, so you can do additional things and put that into a NuGet package, which you can then install here, and that will work as well. Now, the other thing is you might want to actually publish your project to a database, right? So you might want to actually have the database available on your machine, so you can actually talk to it and actually have it deployed, basically. So I could use a tool called SqlProj, which is a command line tool that allows you to deploy the dacpacs to a SQL server, which is what you would typically use in a deployment pipeline, for example. But for development, it's kind of nice to actually be able to just publish it locally, right? And you don't need to have an additional tool installed on your machine. So to do that, we need to make one additional change to our project file, because we need to tell it which version of SQL Server we're going to target for our project. So I can do that by specifying a SQL Server version property right here. And in this case, I'm going to use SQL 140, which is equivalent to SQL Server 2017. That's what I have on my machine at the moment. If you're targeting like SQL Server 2019, you can put in SQL 150, for example. And there's actually a table which lists all the versions and what you need to put in here. That's up on the README in the repo as well. So now that I have that, I can actually use .NET Publish to publish this database or database project to my local SQL Server. So to do that, I'm going to use .NET Publish. And out of the box, it's going to assume that you want to target a local machine, so a SQL Server on your local host, basically. And it's going to use the name of the project file as the name for the database. So in this case, my database of my project file is called database1, so it's going to create a database called database1. And actually, you can see it has successfully deployed the database. So let's switch over to Azure Data Studio.
Jonathan, I assume that you can configure that on the command line, right?
You can configure that in the command line or in the project file. So if I want to change the name, for example, let's switch back here. I can say target database name, and I can choose a different name here.
Okay, cool.
And you can change the server name as well. This also assumes using Windows authentication at the moment, which works fine on Windows, but obviously doesn't work on Linux or on Mac. So what you need to do in that case, you need to specify a username and password, so you can use SQL Server authentication.
Yeah, makes sense.
Technically, you can put those into your project file as well, but we don't recommend doing that because that would mean you basically commit your credentials to version control, which is bad to do. So in that case, you would specify them on the command line when you do the .NET Publish.
Cool.
So let me switch back to Azure Data Studio, and let me show you my databases. I have a couple of databases here. Let me just refresh so we can actually see all the databases. And I have database 1 here. If you look at the tables, we see my fancy table, which was in my project. And we also see the table coming from the other project file that I had, so that I've included with the NuGet package. That also gets deployed here. That's actually optional. If you don't want to deploy those dependent objects as part of the deployment of this project, you can actually turn that off, but by default it assumes that you want to deploy everything. And if you go into programmability here, you can see store procedures, and you see that procedure 1 here as well. And if I do another change to my project, so let's go here, and let's say I want to create another object here. Let's say I want to create a new item. And notice that we don't have any IntelliSense support here. That's actually one of the things that is missing. So let's just create a text file and say, let's create procedure2.sql. And then I can create a procedure call procedure 2, and then begin and then select star from dbo.mytable, for example. Somebody's emailing me all the time. I don't know why. Let's do another .NET publish, and then we should see the new procedure show up in the database as well. It's taking a little time because it's actually comparing what's already in the database and what it needs to deploy. There we go. And then let's go and do a refresh here, and you can actually see the new store procedure showing up here as well.
Okay, so the publish also did a build, right? So it created the dacpac and then published that to the database.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, with the latest version, 1.3.0, it only does a rebuild of the dacpac if something has actually changed. So, for example, if you made changes to the project file, or if you've made changes to one of the SQL scripts, it's going to do a rebuild. If you haven't touched any of those files, it's not going to do a rebuild. So if I do this again, it's going to be faster because it doesn't have to do the compilation again. It's only going to do the publishing again, basically.
Makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I have for now. So I think this is pretty cool. And as I mentioned, it's up on GitHub. It's open source. If you want to help out build this project, please do so. I think we're going to include a link to the repository as well.
Yep.
Join us and let's make this a great project going further.
Cool. Yeah, Jonathan. So thanks for showing us this. I think it's really cool that you can just build your dacpacs and also publish them to a database from your pipelines. So that's pretty cool. And then also without any dependency on Visual Studio or any external tooling. So yeah. I think that's pretty nifty. So just as Jonathan said, if you want to contribute, we will put a link to the repository in the show notes. So go there, read up on the contribution guide and start contributing to this project. So yeah, thanks so much. And I hope you guys liked it, watching it. And we will welcome you to another episode of .Netflix next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.